inclusive, and diversified. Classroom Management 101, inclusive and diversified. Classroom Management 101, inclusive and diversified. Classroom Management 101, inclusive and diversified. Classroom Management 101. At the beginning of the school year, it is expected that students will challenge your patience as well as your authority, because it does take some time to gain a rapport with your students. And once you have that rapport built, you can basically say, and they'll know what that means, and they can read your body language. But until that point, we have to, as teachers, have a plan in place for how we will manage our classroom behavior. And those plans is what I'm calling equitable behavior tiers. Now, I have 6 points regarding some influences that you may want to consider when you are planning your behavior tiers. Number 1, you must provide clear expectations. For example, a lot of teachers have a rule, no talking in class. Well, that's not a good rule. And the reason why it's not a good rule is because, do you not want your students to participate in open discussion? Do you not want them to ask questions or answer questions? You do. So the rule should not be no talking. You have to think about that. Number 2, consequences should fit the crime. Now, I have seen where some teachers will pick out one student and make an example out of them and tear them all the way down, and they are basically the class's whipping boy. And it does gain a sense of empowerment for the teacher, but it will not give you respect in the long run. And that's what we want. We want students to trust us and to respect us. And making an example out of one particular student and treating them harshly is not the way to go about gaining respect. Number 3, emphasize personal responsibility. It is not your job to correct the student's behavior. It is your job to identify the problem and help the students find plausible solutions to correct their own behavior. Now, I'm going to repeat that again. It is not your job to correct student behavior. It is your job to identify that behavior and help the student come up with plausible solutions to self-correct. That is the epitome of teaching, if you ask me. Because if students are merely conditioned, they are being programmed to behave in a certain way and think in a certain manner. And when students are programmed or conditioned, it is next to impossible to teach critical thinking skills. And students will not perform well on critical thinking tests. Why? Because our behavior tiers have instructed that you react this way, you respond this way, you think this way, you behave this way. And so students, unless somebody is standing over their shoulder, constantly giving them feedback, they will not be able to make sound decisions on their own. So we as teachers, we merely want to give them the tools that they need so that they can decide and make good choices. Students merely don't problem solve because they are not expected to in some. One resource that I have used to help students reflect on their behaviors is what I call an attitude check. Now, basically, an attitude check is like a behavior form where the students reflect on what they have done and address ways and methods to correct that behavior. And it includes things like, if I continue to engage in this behavior, what will the consequences be? And how will these consequences affect the goals and the things that I have planned for my life in that way? Also, another good consideration to use is student conferences. And again, you can insert what the student documented in the behavior report or the attitude check and say, hey, I saw you wrote down that you want to be a pediatrician. Now, how are you going to be a pediatrician if you're not paying attention in class, and so forth and so on? Also, parents are a powerful tool with students gaining tools necessary to self-correct, because I'll have a conversation with parents, and when the child tries to enter into certain behavior patterns that I'm trying to get them not to do, then I'll say, hey, I talked with Linda, your mom, and she told me that if you got a good report this week, that she would buy you another video game this weekend and you can play. So that leverage is good to have, and the students will be like, oh, okay, well, yeah, I want that game, so I'm going to do what I need to do to adjust my behavior. So those are great aces in the hole to have. You have to really think outside of the box. Number 5, presents and enforce behavior tiers from day one. Don't start 3 months into school. You want to do this initially. That way, the students will know what consequences to expect for whatever infractions, because if this is not explained and you try to enforce a consequence, the first thing they'll say is, you hadn't been doing that, or you're just making it up now, and you don't want to get pinned against the wall, because now they're having to have an expectation that wasn't always there. So you want to do this from day one. Day one, enforcing the behavior tiers. I would also like to insert the difference between consequence and punishment. These two words bear separate connotations. Consequences are tools that can be used to teach self-correction. Punishment instills anxiety and depletes autonomy. That means the ability to be yourself and know yourself and who you are and how to self-correct. But punishment takes that autonomy away, and students are not left with tools to self-correct. All they know is, if I don't do this, then this is going to happen. And in order to encourage independence and, as stated in the Common Core guidelines, promote college and career readiness, they have to be learners that can judge for themselves, that can evaluate for themselves, that can predict and make decisions. You know the standards. You know them. Okay, moving forward. So your minor infractions could be easily resolved with an attitude check, parent-teacher conference, or a student conference. However, in extreme situations where the student is violent and they're using profanity and they have threatening behaviors, then it's time to refer them to the principal. You have to get the administration involved, because at this point it is a safety concern for you and maybe other students in the classroom. But in these moments, it's important to keep your head and follow your plan of action. So that's why you have to have one. So in extreme situations, you have a protocol to follow when students are irate and out of control. And some kids, they'll just do it and act out just to see if they have immunity for consequence. And that's where the equity part steps in. If a child is stepping out of character, no matter who that child is, if the child is Jesus' son, he needs tools to self correct. And that's basically the point. And that's what equity in discipline is all about. It's about having the tools that you need to fix your behavior and not stay on that same course. Also, don't be distracted by the yelling or the screaming or the tantrums that a student might throw, because what they're merely trying to do is knock you off your game and make you forget to follow your behavior tiers. So be mindful of that and don't fall into that trap. Also, I've had situations where I was tempted not to write a student up because the students I had written up, they were not given consequences as far as I could see concerning their behavior, and I was in very much disagreement with the slap on the wrist that the administrator had given them. However, it is still important that you follow the behavior tiers, and I'm going to share a personal story with you right now concerning why you should do this and still report the incident. So I had a situation where a student said that I was treating them unfairly and that they did not deserve to be suspended, because that was what was in question, whether or not they would be suspended. And I merely said, okay, here is my documentation. On this day, I told Johnny to fill out this attitude check. Johnny indicated that he would stop doing XYZ because he wants to be a veterinarian. On this day, I conferenced with little Johnny's mother. Little Johnny's mother told me that she took the PlayStation away and he was not able to play games anymore. And then on another day, little Johnny had to be escorted out of the classroom because he refused to follow directions, and I notified campus security and he was escorted out the classroom. So I had all of this documented in a folder, in a file. And that was my evidence that I intervened and I provided an opportunity for little Johnny to correct his behavior. Now, at the end of the day, it's a lot of work to go through. However, it is necessary. Now, I'm going to have to wrap this up and I'm going to come back with a part 2, and we're going to continue this behavior tier discussion. So, I'll see you. Come right back, okay? I'll see you in a bit. Inclusive and diversified. Classroom Management 101. Inclusive and diversified. Classroom Management 101. Inclusive and diversified. Classroom Management 101. Inclusive and diversified. Classroom Management 101.